Does this keep happening to you? Well, don't worry my humble Spartans, you've come to the right place. In today's video we're going to have a look at the 3 best tips to make you better at WarThunder. But who am I and why should you listen to me? Well, I'm just a guy. But a guy who gets several nukes routinely here on YouTube and TikTok. And I'm going to share with you the 3 best tips that mold into my playstyle that I use to get nukes. So grab a cup of tea and let's begin. Our first tip is positioning, and there are 2 major points that make up the tip of positioning. Those points are map awareness and knowing your vehicle. For this example, I'm going to be using the SAV 1248 for Sweden, a 3.7 tank destroyer. As my tank has no turret and just a cannon poking out the front, then I need to choose where I'm going effectively and what position I'll take. Looking at the map, we have 3 points. Knowing our tank's limitations, we know where to effectively position ourselves throughout the game. For tank destroyers like this one, you potentially don't want to cross the halfway line, as you won't have the mobility to deal with a flank. However, if you're in a light tank, then it may be beneficial for you to push further ahead, whilst in a heavy or a medium tank, your best position will probably be bunkering down on a capture point. Now I know my tank's limitations, I'm going to essentially constantly maneuver between B and C capture points. Doing this, I should keep the enemies in front of me at all times and I won't have to worry about being flanked. The second point of this tip is map awareness, specifically where your teammates are. Knowing where your teammates are usually is a good indication of where the enemies are. At this part of the game I'm in a bit of a pickle. There's an enemy on the other side of the wall. Whilst it may be tempting to push up to try and take this enemy out, if we look at our map, we will know where our teammates are, which allows us to fill in the gaps in the map to guess where the enemies may be. Making this calculated assumption, we know that if we do push, we may open ourselves up to an unseen enemy. Thankfully we didn't, because moments later an enemy did appear in the exact location we thought they might be. If we did move up, we would surely be destroyed, but we kept in mind tip 1. We knew to stick to our tank's position and kept awareness of the map, allowing us to have good positioning throughout the game, and ultimately get a nuke with this SAV, even though we were 3 PRs lower than most enemies. Traffic routes. What do I mean by this? I mean the routes that players usually take to get to objectives, such as capture points. You also don't need to know every single map for this tip, but figuring out the likely routes that players will take to get to objectives will help you learn all of the maps. So let's take a look at a couple of maps for example. All of these maps have 3 points and pretty much 99% of the time the majority of the enemies will follow the same paths to these capture points. Usually these paths end up with the quickest routes to the objectives. Try and figure out these paths, but you should be able to guess where these paths may be just by looking at the maps. This is the fastest way for you to learn a map, by knowing these traffic routes. Once when you know these routes, you will know where to flank, you will know where to position yourself, and you will also know exactly where the enemies might be going. Flanking. This is the best tip I can give if you want to get nukes and just simply better at the game. When it comes to nukes, you need to get a lot of spawn points and you need to get them rather quickly, and no other tactic works better than flanking. Flanking is of course best done in a light tank, but can be done in pretty much any vehicle. However, there is one point you must always remember when it comes to flanking, and that is not to overextend. People always assume that flanking is going as far away from the main fight as possible to either get completely behind the enemy or completely unseen. However, doing this leaves you vulnerable to overextending. The further deep you go, the more likely you are to becoming overrun, especially if you become spotted. So, the best way to flank is by using the 2 previous tips. Make sure you have good positioning and know the traffic routes of the enemies. Just one good player in a team can completely win the game for the team by flanking well, and will be the best tactic for you to get nukes. However, there is one thing you must always remember when it comes to flanking. Don't overextend. What I mean by this is don't remain in one position. I see it all the time where players will get to a good spot and just camp there. The enemy will remember your position, and once you've been spotted, it's too late. As you can see here, the best flank is one that's constantly on the move, behind enemy lines or overlooking those traffic routes. So those are my 3 tips on how to get better at WarThunder and specifically get those sweet nukes we all want. If you enjoyed this video, I do in-depth tips in most of my videos, so please consider subscribing and joining our Spartan community. Until next time, Spartans,